Welcome back to our special analysis of the third quarter GDP numbers, which have come in at a surprising 7%, and the full year numbers as well, likely to be 7.1% according to numbers released by the Central Statistical Organization just a little while ago. We have been discussing with a former chief statistician, Dr. Pranab Sen, the chief economic advisor of State Bank of India, Soumyakanti Ghosh, and the chief economist at rating agencies CARE and CRISIL, Mr. Madan Sabnawis and D.K. Joshi. Dr. Sen, you said that probably the third quarter numbers for manufacturing, for instance, looked very good at 8.3 because there must have been channel stuffing. Most of the goods supplied and kept at the inventory level. Do you think, therefore, that we should be prepared for a lower Q4 number? What would be your best estimate, GDP or GVA?
No, let's be clear, LATHA. What they have at the moment are hard estimates of Q3, and the Q4, which is the full year's estimate, is again an extrapolation. Okay? It's extrapolation using the Q3 numbers.
Yes.
So it follows exactly the same seasonality that has prevailed in the past.
No, I mean on May 31st, when we get the Q4 numbers, should we be prepared for a downward number?
When you get Q4 numbers, I suspect they will be sharply down. Okay. Even though we are talking still about essentially corporate data, the organized sector data, which is not going to capture the full effects of the, or even the larger part of the sector demonetization. But I think you will see much, much lower figures for Q4.
Okay. Well, let me get the man of the moment, the Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Mr. Shaktikanta Das, who has just joined us. Mr. Das, good evening. Thanks much for joining us. I'll tell you why there is some discomfort with the numbers announced. If you derived the private final consumption numbers, they come in at 10% growth for the third quarter. Manufacturing, according to the CSO, in the third quarter has risen by 8.3%. Why these numbers are uncomfortable is because when you look at the Hindustan Unilever numbers, they showed a 7% fall in volume, not prices. Asian Paints, 4% fall in volume. Sir, all the two-wheelers showed 15 to 20% fall in volume. So, I mean, they're not reconciling with the micros.
Well, I mean, if you recall, you will remember that all along, when the Q2 figures were released and when there were remarks that the Q3 will be affected because of demonetization, our response was that let us not go by anecdotal evidence. Let us wait for hard facts. Let us wait for actual statistics. I stick to the same position now. Now we have the actual statistics before us, so far as Q3 is concerned, and on that basis the projection for the whole year. So let us go by actual statistics. Now, to make a speculation at this stage that some two-wheeler, two-wheeler manufacturing sector has not did not do well during the Q3. But overall manufacturing has done well in Q3. 8.3% is a very robust growth so far as manufacturing is concerned. And also we cannot presume at this stage that the manufacturers were going on manufacturing and pushing the products into the supply chain. Now, nobody would like to block working capital and, divert capacities just for stuffing the supply channel. So all that I am saying is that the earlier projections, the earlier negative projections which were made with regard to the adverse impact, if any, of demonetization, I think they were all overestimation. And the economy has come back. It's very much back on the rails. And the process of demonetization is near complete. And if you recall, let me also mention that today morning the OECD, while releasing their economic survey for India, the Secretary General himself has gone on record by saying that they consider India as a star performer so far as the reforms are concerned. Now the reform history, the reform track record of the government is very robust and it will continue to be so.
No, that is not disputed. Sir, that is not disputed. The reform agenda is not disputed. I am only not able to marry the micro numbers we get from corporates. For instance, today we got the core sector numbers. Cement is down about 14% over and above an 8% contraction in December. So, we are getting actual, all the cement companies in the third quarter, when they announced numbers, said that their volume contracted by about 8%. So, I'm not able to marry the micros and the macros. Mr. Das. Mr. Das? Oh.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Mr. Das, you can hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, exactly that, sir. Cement output, even according to the core sector, is a contraction in January. It was a contraction in December. Likewise, all the companies also indicated the same to us. Land registrations have fallen. I mean, one can see that there is anecdotal evidence of lower activity.
Okay. Now, let me mention, you have referred one to the core sector data and you have also referred to real estate activity. Now, so far as core sector data is concerned, as you are aware, the sample size of that is quite limited. It's based on the figures of a certain number of companies. So therefore, now that we have the overall GDP numbers, the core sector data is obviously subsumed into that number. And so far as the real estate sector is concerned, let us remember that the government has now enacted the Real Estate Regulatory Authority, that act is now enacted. So the entire real estate sector is now undergoing a process of structural reform, a process of structural readjustment and correction, if you may say, if I can say so. There is greater amount of consumer protection, there is greater amount of protection to individual,
and so you're attributing lower activity to that.
So therefore, there could have been a slowdown in the real estate activity because the sector is undergoing a structural correction.
Okay. All right, Mr. Das, we will leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us with that spirited defense of the numbers. One hopes, of course, the economy is growing at 7%. It is just that I have I'm unable to reconcile some of the micro numbers with some of the macro numbers that we have got. On that note, Xiaomyo, Dr. Sen was just saying that probably we are going to get sharply lower fourth quarter numbers, both GVA and GDP. Your sense?
No, see, as of now, if we go by an estimate of 7.1%, which is unchanged, the Q4 numbers is also coming at 7%. So I am not sure whether the FY17 numbers will be revised downwards in May 17. But let me just again give you some hard facts regarding the CSO numbers. I mean, as I was looking through the data, and I just mentioned to you, the construction sector data for Q3 is actually at a 7-quarter low, and the finance sector data is actually at an all-time low in the current base year, which is from 2011-12.
Okay.
But the recovery which is showing in the Q4 is also significantly on the high side. For example, construction sector growth rate in Q4 is supposed to grow at 4.8%. And you all know that the cement dispatches have declined by 13% in January. So possibly, I mean, there is an element of downward revision which is incorporated into the data for Q4, but I'm not sure whether it will happen in May 2017
Fair
or
point.
at a later date.
Fair point. Well, there's just one more question I want to ask Dr. Sen before I lose the connection. Dr. Sen, I was given to understand by the person no less than the Chief Economic Advisor when he spoke after the economic survey that we use the value-added formula of the formal sector for the informal sector because we don't know the value-added formula just yet for the informal sector. So is it that the informal sector has been overestimated? And probably in Jan of 2018 when the final numbers come, it may not look as good as 7% GDP growth.
Yes, the thing is, in the quarterly numbers, we simply have no information on the informal sector. So we use the formal sector data as a proxy. And the assumption is that the two will move together. Now, we, I think, know that with the demonetization, the two have actually not moved together. The informal sector has been hit much, much harder. So yes, I think we are overstating it, but we won't know until at least next year.
Okay. All right. We should, of course, have the next part of this discussion probably next year. But Mr. D.K. Joshi, what is the number finally, therefore, you will work with as realistic GDP or GVA for the current year?
Well, we have an estimate of 6.9%. So we are sticking to that as of now. And I think we are also working with the same set of information most people are working with. I think one thing that this data shows up is, or at least most of the forecasts also show, is that the demonetization has has somewhat depressed the economy, but it's not been a catastrophe, I mean, as many had expected earlier.
Okay, then perhaps it will not be way lower than 6.7. Madan Sabnavis, very quickly, your number for GDP for the current year?
In fact, we are still looking at a number now of 7.1%. We earlier had 6.8%. So we're assuming that if the first 3 quarters numbers are not revised downwards, and because we had an estimate around 7.2, 7.3 for the fourth quarter, that is before these results came out. So I think we should be on track of being in the 7% mark.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. So it's a divided house as far as expert economists are concerned. A couple of them believing that, yes, the economy will come out with a 7% GDP growth in the current year, give or take 10 basis points. But Dr. Sen, who has been there, done that, and Shaumyo of SBI as well, believing that we are probably heading for a lower fourth quarter number than is currently forecast by the CSO, and that when the final numbers come in next year, the estimates, the figures, GDP figures for third quarter and fourth quarter may look much more depressed than what the CSO is currently presenting. Well, we will have to wait 12 months to know that. For the moment, thank you very much for joining me on this special broadcast of the third quarter GDP numbers.